We want to welcome to Fayetteville Jason Seitz, who is currently the Managing Director of Techstars Austin. He was the co-founder of Slice Host, which was an early pioneer in the virtualized cloud computing space. It was acquired by Rackspace in 2008, and it today formed the backbone of what is Rackspace Cloud. Starting in 2011, he moved to Techstars, which is one of the leading global accelerators with programs in many different cities over the world. Jason currently leads Austin. He started with Techstars Cloud in San Antonio, where he accelerated such companies as Keen.io, ZeroVM, TempoDB, and Cloudability. And starting with the fall of 2013, he moved to Austin. And that demo day concluded in November, and he accelerated such companies as Ubi and Gone. He's also an angel investor between 3 Techstars classes and some individual investments. He's invested in approximately 65 companies, and he also serves on the board of DigitalOcean. So, welcome to Northwest Arkansas. Let's give a hand to Jason Seitz.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. I need to log my computer back in. It is actually my first time in Arkansas, the state. Yeah. I was born in St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis, and I live in Texas now, and both of them border Arkansas, and I've never been to Arkansas, which is kind of nuts, right? The one thing that I thought was kind of kooky when I got out of I was going down the escalator in the airport to head out to the taxi this morning. I guess U of A has this like ad that says wherever you're from, like now you're home, and I tried to not interpret it as a threat, right? Like am I can I leave at some point? Like, right? I told that joke to the cab driver to test it. It did not work with him, but so I don't know. All right, so I'm going to talk about open source software. I think the title on the agenda was Open Source is Eating the World. This is my version. Business in the Age of Free Technology, or how open source is changing everything. And really, this is not a talk about open source. And it's not really a talk about technology. It's a talk about business. So all the technical people in the audience, I'm sorry. But it's about kind of the market dynamics of what's happening in reverberation to open source and free technology. So this is the format. I'm going to cover these 4 things. I'm going to spend a little time giving you some background on intellectual property, and then I'm going to give you a history lesson on free software. Then I want to give you the meat of the presentation, which is how to build a durable business in this environment, and then I'm going to sum it up and give you some contact info. So the first half is mostly me creating the mental backdrop to prepare your minds for my injection of wisdom. Then I will drop my wisdom bombs on you. And then I will give you my contact info so that later tonight or tomorrow, when all the things that sound like they make sense to you today no longer make sense, because you've recognized all the obvious holes and discrepancies, you can close the loop and contact me and tell me where I'm wrong and how I'm an idiot. So anyway, we're going to get started with intellectual property. So what is intellectual property? This is intangible but valuable stuff. It's the name we give to intangible but valuable stuff that we think up, right? So, and presumably, the reason why we've given it a moniker is because we think it has value. We think that a company that has IP somehow is getting leverage from that in their business. And there are a few legal terms for intellectual property that I want to glance over very quickly before I land on the one that we're going to spend time talking about. So most people are probably familiar with trademarks, which is a registration of an image or a brand or an identity or a name that represents your company, and the government extends protection for you if you register it. Then there's the concept of a copyright, which is taking some sequence of symbols. Written word could be a book, could be a screenplay, could be software source code itself. But the specific combination of these words and symbols, I can put a mark on it, and I extended and afforded some protection by the government. Then there is the trade secret, and this picture, which you probably can't quite read, is the Colonel's secret 11 blend of herbs and spices. A trade secret is the things that you know that nobody else knows, right? And so if you have a trade secret inside of your business, it's actually your responsibility to keep that thing a secret. So the government and the legal system protects your trade secrets if you protect your trade secrets. They'll treat it like other property that you have. So if you make effort and extend effort to have your employees and people that touch your business respect a certain set of confidential information, and that information is taken, that's treated as theft. But you have to treat it as a trade secret. But I'm going to spend most of our time talking about patents, right? And I'm sure everybody has familiarity with patents on the surface, and patents are, again, another government registration that gives you protection over an invention, right? So this is a protection over an idea, a concept, right? And really what it comes down to is, it's as simple as if you want cool stuff, someone has to invent it, and the entire patent system is intended to create incentives so that people who come up with cool stuff have the ability to later profit from it, right? So I come up with this really fantastic idea, and presumably because of the patent system and patent structure, my ability to protect my exclusive use of that idea, I'm more likely to do that because I know that I can monetize it, bring my own products to market, or license it to someone else, right? So what types of things do people actually patent? Well, things that seem like things that should be patented and have been patented, like the cotton gin, or the light bulb, or the telephone, right? And there's a couple of simple rules, not so simple rules, but it's easy to summarize simply, that the government likes to look at, the US Patent and Trademark Office, for whether or not something is applicable for this type of protection. And that is utility, being novel, and being non-obvious. And what utility means is that it's useful, ultimately. Being novel means that it should be new. It's the first kind of formulation of this thing. It's some new concept. And being non-obvious means that it's hard, right? So that it should be hard at some level. So that begs the question then, what can't you patent? What sorts of things don't fit this? Well, you can't patent gravity, right? Which might sound obvious, but when we're starting to talk about laws and rules, you have to get very specific. So gravity is viewed as nature, right? And when you discover a fundamental law of nature, you shouldn't be able to protect your exclusive use of that law. So as another example, so gravity sounds insane, like how could you patent gravity, right? But Thomas Edison patented a light bulb, right? So why can't he patent electricity? Well, you can't patent electricity, right? Like think of how ridiculous it would be if this fundamental force of nature had some sort of rope put around it that not everybody could use it, right? And it turns out, and this is where it gets interesting, where I'm heading, is that mathematics and algorithms are viewed by the USPTO and via case trial to be considered part of nature, right? So you can't patent math, right? If I discover a fundamental theorem of mathematics, that's viewed as a discovery, not an invention, right? And a patent, a creation I can protect. But when I discover something fundamental about the world, that's for everybody, right? So there's this weird kind of area where you're not supposed to touch. So that's all well and good, but you can patent software, right? And you can't patent math, right? And the problem with this, and where this leads, is that provably software is math, right? So you have this very, very completely illogical sequence that is the foundation of many of the problems trying to apply the patent system to software. So this is one of the core issues why patents come up over time and time again in tech. The other, which is more obvious than this perhaps, is that the patent system and judges and lawyers and people that are drafting these laws don't have a level of sophistication to understand how to apply the obvious, whether or not something is non-obvious, right? So when they're looking at an algorithm or so that someone's proposing to patent, like who's deciding if this is trivial or if this is hard? Like so there's that issue, and then there's also the issue that it's an algorithm, it shouldn't be patented in the first place, right? So that is the backdrop of that, right? And this is a problem. And it leads to things that look like this. A beautiful piece of work. Patent number 5,893,120. Methods and apparatus for information storage and retrieval using a hashing technique with external chaining and on-the-fly removal of expired data. That sounds complicated. It's not, is the upshot. And so effectively, that patent is a patent of this flow chart, right? And so if you're non-technical, you'll just have to take me at face. But basically, and if you are technical, what this patent covers is basically creating a data structure, a caching structure, which takes a tag and data, hashes the tag, does insert it into a hash table, handles collisions via linked list hung off of the hash table entries, and all along the way checks to see if data should be expired and deletes it if so, right? So that level of sophistication, if I describe that to a first-year undergrad computer science student at a top university, they should be able to build that for me, right? That to me does not pass that hurdle of being non-obvious. Now, if you look at the date on this, April 6, 1999, I actually was a junior undergrad at the time that this was filed. And I could have written this at that time, right? So it absolutely did not even meet the standard at that time. Now, this patent is held by a firm that uses it to extort and litigate millions of dollars out of many, many companies. And another thing you'll just have to take me on my face on this, probably every single computing device in this room that's running an operating system is running an algorithm inside of it that is a material violation of this patent. So the people who own this patent don't even have to discriminate when they sue. They just, if you're using a computer, like we'll dig it out in court and discovery. But I'm sure if you're running Microsoft products or you're running Linux or anything, like you owe us some money, right? This is not good for anybody, and it comes because of this mismatch in sophistication and application of patent system to algorithms, right? So who's doing this sort of thing? Lots of people. It happens a lot. I don't know if you saw this as recent news, I think like last week, 2 weeks ago. Google, via 2 pieces of paper that don't look too much different than that one. They're a little bit more sophisticated algorithms, but I still don't think that they should have the level of protection that they do. Google doesn't back down on these things, which is great, and takes them all the way to the courtroom. They lost, and 1.36% of AdWords revenue over the period of time that the suit covers is about $1 billion, right? So $1 billion. This is the second lawsuit that Google, when I was Googling up to find this, I got a $150 or $200 million lawsuit that they lost like in December, right? Like that sucks, like that's awful, right? So who is doing that? They're called patent trolls, right? That's the name that we give to this type of entity. And if you look at their business model very simply, or if you think about it very simply, if you don't know much about or haven't been involved in a patent troll lawsuit, it may just sound on the surface like here's how it works. I just go find a bunch of overly broad patents that are patenting completely obvious things. I grab them up. I just sue companies that are big enough to settle and that want to avoid litigation. And that's it. That's my business model. It's actually way shadier and slimier than that, significantly so. So here's how it works in practice. And this is how. So I'm giving you anecdote, but trust me, this is how it works in practice. The patent troll, Like let's say I want to start Jason's Patent Troll Inc. I acquire some bucket of patents, or acquire the rights to acquire some bucket of patents to go run my scheme with, and I go to a bunch of companies that I'm planning to sue, and I give them the opportunity to invest in the patent troll entity. Right? So you get to pick, you get to choose with your business is doing very well, Google. You can pay me off or invest in me and be on the winning side of this, or I'll just come back and talk to you in like a month, keep my card, because we'll serve you the lawsuit. And they just tell you what they're going to do. It's absurd, right? And it's not illegal. This entire system, the US patent system as applied to technology, is basically government-protected organized crime, right? Like it's absolutely extortion. That's a shakedown, and it's based on the broken rules of the system being applied to our world, right? So, but what a patent troll really looks like to you, if you're a big business, it looks more like this. It's a parasite, and I don't say that with hyperbole because it makes them sound nasty, although I think that they're vile. But they operate exactly like parasites. I'm given to metaphor, right? So I like to compare things to the biological world a lot. But a very, very good parasite, it can't kill its host, or it would defeat the purpose, right? It wants you to be as healthy as you possibly can be while maximizing its own life utility function, whatever that happens to be, right? If I'm too aggressive a parasite, I damage my host, it dies. I got to find another one. That's not optimal. And so when you are XYZ Corp doing $500 million a year in revenue, and patent trolls start knocking on the door once a week or once a month, the first time you encounter it, you might think, oh, holy crap, this could put me out of business, right? But it never will put you out of business. It's just you just have to pick how expensive it's going to be. And this is what every single big company is doing. Every listed company on the stock exchange, every tech company you know, every one of them has had to make that decision. And what is the decision? Either buy into the entity, or just pay them off, or take it to court and litigate. So when you see patent trials going to court, these are the people that are taking sacrifice for the rest of the industry. So when Google does that, I mean, that is so huge. Every time it happens, it exposes this issue more and more. Rackspace is starting to do this too. But it's extremely costly. It's a negative ROI for Google to take that to court. Google could lose $1 billion on that. They probably won't. It may get settled down to whatever. But I bet they could have given that suing firm $20 million to go away, and it would have been done, right? But they didn't. On principle, they didn't do it. So we should reward that type of thought. All right. So the patent system's gotten so mangled that it doesn't look anything like what it originally was intended to be for, which was to incentivize people to invent cool things so that they would profit from them after they invent them. Now we talk about defensive patents. And so what's the thought there? The thought is that, you know what? Patents are so powerful now in tech that I could sue anybody. Everybody infringes on this patent, and everybody can sue me. It starts to look a whole lot less like a knife or a gun and a whole lot more like a nuke. Right? So you end up building this basket of protective weaponry that is there for mutual assured destruction, right? And that's how these firms think about it. If you are Microsoft or Amazon or whoever, you just want to have a big arsenal so that if in the legitimate, because first of all, now I'm talking about patents relative to legitimate companies, right? So a patent troll suing me, this arsenal does nothing for me, because nothing hurts the parasite. The parasite, it's just, you can fight it on principle or not. But if I am, Apple, and I want to protect, the phone, and I know that Samsung's going to go try and replicate a bunch of this stuff, what do? Well, I want to have a patent basket that's as thorny as possible that touches as many Samsung products as possible that are not even their phone, right? Because that's my ammo to give me leverage in that negotiation. And so that's how big firms think about patents, and that's what defensive patents look like. And you end up with some firms that are cooperating with these things. There's a patent non-aggression pact, right? Which is a very clinical sounding name. But what this means, and so these are some companies that have done this. Amazon and Microsoft, That happened, I think, maybe 2008, somewhere around there. And so Amazon has a lot of patents. Microsoft has many, many more. Look how many times Microsoft's on this list, right? And what did they do? They struck a deal that said, let's just treat our two baskets as one giant basket, right? So now you have the full arsenal of all of these things. And money may have flowed from one direction to the other, but those details aren't disclosed. And this is kind of how patents are happening at the big scale, right? But this isn't new at all. So this is a 1911 Ford Model T Touring. And that year, 1911, Henry Ford, building cars, right? I'm sure you heard of him, was violating a patent on two-stroke gasoline engine. And he took it to court because he thought that this is too fundamental, right? Everybody should be able to build cars, not just the one firm that has this. And he won. He won the right to overturn that patent. And in the process, started a patent non-aggression pact entity, effectively, with all of the other auto companies. And all of the auto manufacturers at the time shared freely their patents with each other. So they would develop independently and contribute into the basket for the betterment of the auto industry as a whole. 515 patents, I think, right? So crazy, like a long time ago. And it's hard to rewind time and think, what would the auto industry have looked like if people had litigated the way that they're litigating now and fought the innovation instead of aided the innovation, right? So there you go. The patent system today, broken and mangled, right? All right, feeling pretty depressed? Good. Let's move on. So free software. So the history of free software. Brief history. So in the beginning, this picture, I don't know, circa 50s or so, right? So at the very beginning, software was free. It started out free, and it existed in one of two places. Either in academia and research world, where there already is a culture of collaboration and sharing, because this is all about building knowledge, or in the business world. And in the business world, people didn't view software as having standalone value. They viewed the hardware as having standalone value. And software was a bundled component of those products. And they priced those products in a way where it was very decoupled from the software. And so people didn't really have a concept of the value of software. And that continued for some time until there was a lawsuit related to, an antitrust lawsuit actually, related to the bundling of software, right? Is everybody familiar with this one? Yeah, that's right. IBM in 1969, not Microsoft with Internet Explorer, but in 1969, customers of IBM who didn't want IBM to pre-bundle software on their hardware because I'm paying for it, like clearly there's this extra thing, it has some value, I don't want that, I'm buying my support for software over here, please decouple that. And that started down this path of pricing this conceptual stuff, this software, right? And that laid really the backdrop, the foundation, where not too much later, Bill Gates founded the initial Microsoft in that IBM kind of world, right? This is my favorite Bill Gates picture. So this letter on the right is a 1976 letter, open letter to hobbyists who were pirating Altair Basic. Right, so Microsoft wrote Altair Basic, and they were selling it, and all the people in that community, which was a community of hobbyists, who their usage pattern up until that point in time was write software, share software, write software, share software. These are just bits, run them on your machine. But they were selling that to some people, and it was getting copied. And Bill Gates, in this letter, very short letter, said this isn't right. If we want software to exist, we have to create the incentive structures that are going to pay the developers that are going to care for and create this software, right? I think somewhere in there he talks about his calculated income to himself hourly based on the time that he put into building Altair Basic, and it's like I'm making $2 an hour like writing the software, right? So boo-hoo for Bill Gates, right? But anyway. But at the time, he was taking a philosophical stance that stealing is bad, and software has value, and someone created it, and so if you're using it without paying for it, you're stealing it. If there were an anti-Bill Gates, it would be this guy, Richard Stallman, right? Who was a contemporary there. He was, in the 70s, he was working in these research facilities and causing trouble. And generally, and so actually an interesting thing about Bill Gates, one thing I wanted to say here is, Bill Gates really saw into the future, very much so. He placed a bet on the hardware margins being completely commoditized and software being where the value is. Very early, first person to make that call. Did very well with it, as I'm sure you know. Richard Stallman also can see into the future, right? And so Richard Stallman, almost at the same time Bill Gates is doing this, Richard Stallman is saying we are going to be fighting over things like net neutrality, right? Way out in front of that kind of thing, right? Talking about philosophical freedom of technology, right? Really interesting guy, and in 1983, he wrote this GNU manifesto, which laid out this conceptual idea of a completely free operating system. Also talked a lot about this dichotomy, like the spectrum of understanding what he means by free and what we mean by free. So the top line, I don't know how well you can read it, says free as in beer, and the bottom line says free as in speech. So I'll explain what that means so you don't have to think very deeply about it. But free as in beer would be like, hey, here's a bunch of beer, drink it, it's free, right? Free as in speech speaks to this fundamental freedom for me to express myself. So free software in the free as in beer vein would be, I wrote this software, you can use it, like kind of if you remember what shareware used to look like way back when, right? You could use it, you don't have to pay me, but you can't do anything, you can't modify it. You can't change it. You don't have any right or license to extend it or to embed it in another system or to do things with it that would imply freedoms. And so that is what free as in speech means. And that's what Richard Stallman, he is as red line as you can get to the free as in speech territory. For him, it is an ethical and moral right for you to be able to extend technology and for you to be able to control the technology that is in your hands and in your pocket. And he has to, even today, with as developed as the open source movement is, he has to go to great lengths to not touch proprietary software and proprietary hardware. And he has like one specific laptop he can use, and it's because it's got one specific set of firmware, one specific, but he can do it. He can do it, which is great. There was a long period of time when he couldn't really even do that. So that's the 80s. We're progressing in time. Then came along this guy. Our favorite Finn, 1991 Linus Torvalds, first version of Linux, right? Linux, I don't think I probably even have to explain the impact that has had and the relevance that it has to the story. Other than to point out which Richard Stallman would want pointed out, that it's not GNU, right? And they're very different things. And we could get down to the bowels of understanding and talking about different types of licensing and different models. But on a relative basis, this is pretty damn good compared to what we had, right? And Linux has clearly won the battle of being this collaborative platform for us. You have to look at the environment at the time in 1991. Software everywhere. I mean, Microsoft was utterly dominant at that point in time. And in the business world, you would be running IBM mainframes and branded IBM Unix, AIX, things like that. All right, then you have this guy here, late 90s, Eric S. Raymond. That book title actually it started out as a paper called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, later turned into a book, Musings on Linux and Open Source. Was something, basically the founding of an accidental revolution. And what the important thing about this work and what he did is that he helped sort through the ideologies. Right? So there was work done to kind of categorize and think about how do we talk about this stuff and how do we think about this stuff. And we come up with another spectrum, right? So you have free as in beer and free as in software. I mean, free as in freedom. And we can be people who advocate for free and be somewhere on that spectrum, right? Like maybe we're not going to be as Richard Stallman-esque about free as in freedom if we get to have a lot of free stuff which is useful to us, right? So this other spectrum is a spectrum of rationalization around open source technology. You have open source is important because of social imperative. This is Richard Stallman, right? This is moral right. It's an ethical issue. Then you have open source because it's a technological advantage. That's the code is more stable, it's more secure, we can do things more with it, it drives standardization, yada yada. So there is almost an economic argument that some people will make, and then there's a philosophical argument, and both sets of these people live in the open source world, and it's interesting, but they're these kind of almost like political parties that a different school of thought on how to think about open source. But one thing that did happen with this guy, Eric Raymond, right after that paper, Netscape conceded, right? They're like, we can't crack the nut. We're not gonna, we're gonna give up at some level the original strategy of monetizing our proprietary web browser. And what they did was they open sourced a bunch of their code. But it only, at that point in time, it didn't have the name open source. They just said, here, everybody can use this stuff, and the way we talked about it was very complex. There were 5 or 6 different names that people were applying to these things, and they all meant subtly different things. And Eric Raymond, with a small group of other people at this strategy session in Palo Alto, debating the classification of these things, coined this term open source. And the reason why it's important is now that we have a word for the thing, we have a movement, right? Like once you name something, it has real power. And that really was a turning point. And you can almost see this trajectory from Linux to the coining of open source to today, and how much has changed in that 2 decades is crazy, right? So that's kind of backdrop of open source. And regardless of the philosophical versus technological, bottom line is it exists now, right? And a really, really interesting thing about it in how I think about this via metaphor is it's almost like creating life, right? And the reason why I would make that metaphor is that it would be almost impossible to eradicate life on planet Earth at this point. Like we could try. If we put all of our ingenuity into just wiping it out, like we'd miss some like super like hardy bacteria stuff that living in like weird like sulfur things at the bottom of the earth. Like it's like because it just keeps permutating and it finds these niches and it keeps going and going and going. And it's because of the breadth, it's resistant. It's resistant to these attacks, right? And open source, because it has this very wide frame now via GitHub's social coding and the fact that we all are pushing code, forking, modifying, changing, adapting. We've built an almost genetic-like mutation cycle relative to software and technology innovation. That is like a genie you can never fit back in a bottle, right? Which is fantastic, right? And this is like the kind of the happy conclusion to the horrible patent setup, which is patent system is almost irrelevant because there's nothing that you could do with patents that could prevent the open source world from eventually pulling in functionality and replicating things that are perceived to be advantageous, right? So let's see where I am. So biological systems adapt. So I already basically hit this point. And the way that I would think about this is, almost the frivolity of trying to patent a technology advance when you have this genetic, mutative, adaptive biological base is literally as soon as we, being all of the sensors in this environment, detect this benefit, we'll immediately start adapting towards it, right? So you don't have to signal to the open source community to start doing something that seems like it makes sense. It happens on its own. You can't prevent it, right? But the challenge there is this, which is if I can't patent my software, where does my margin come from? right? Even if I'm using a trade secret to protect what I'm doing, I come up with this really clever thing to do that nobody else can replicate. But if you can see the end result and you start to guess about how it works, and eventually any technology that looks interesting will have an open source parallel, right? So how do you build maintainable margin when the value, like almost the intrinsic value, extractable value of technology is driven to zero, right? That's the question. And that sets up the next part. So now your brains, you've been totally brainwashed, at this point I can tell. So durable businesses. How to make a buck in the modern world. I think of this world as 3 different categories of business. Like you're either going to make money doing one of these 3 things, or some combination of them. You're going to sell people, you're going to sell things, or you're going to sell privilege. That's it. It used to be that sell technology was one of them. I think that one is gone, right? And so what do I mean by this? Well, people means things like custom software development, right? So like if in a world where every single ounce of software was free, you still could build a consultancy that would do like customization of whatever for people or glue together systems. Like that business will never ever go away, right? Support and training, right? Like Cloudera. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Cloudera, right? So like they go to large enterprises and teach them how to install Hadoop, right? Like they get paid for their instructive resources. MySQL also and Red Hat both have a support licensing model. I say hat for MySQL. MySQL bought by Sun bought by Oracle. MySQL is probably dead. Don't use it anymore. So you have this kind of realm where you're layering an extra margin on top of human time, right? Now, the interesting one I'll put into this category of people is innovation. So if you are a company based on innovation, this is why Apple's on here, by the way, it's a category 1 company. And that may be counterintuitive at first. And the reason why it's your category 1 company is to out-innovate, I have to expend increasingly more energy on people. Right? I have to, think about how many people it takes for Apple to do something that's going to be revolutionary now with the iPhone, right? Like, that was a category 1 innovation. So Apple, circa early 2000s, category 1 company. Microsoft, circa 70s and 80s, category 1 company, right? Then there's category 2, which is you can sell stuff, right? So you could be an online retailer. Right? Like people will allow you to have a margin, a transactional margin on top of selling goods. You can, here's a list of some companies here to talk about. Dell, OEM, like they glue together a bunch of stuff, assemble it and sell it, will allow you to take a tax on that, right? Uber is an example I'll use here, right? So Uber, you think selling stuff, what is it? Is it selling stuff? Yeah, it's moving this human from point A to point B, right? And there's basically a high margin taxi, right? And so their margin comes from our inherent willingness to pay a margin on logistical transport, right? Which I think we probably always will do. I put Rackspace on here, and hosting companies to me are a category 2 because you might think, oh, technology and bits and bytes and whatever, and they run lots of open source and yada yada. But really, a hosting product is just a package of real estate and electricity. That's it. It's a packaged product, combination of real estate and electricity. And people are going likely, at least my bet would be, to think that real estate is always something you have to rent. And we seem to probably always think that electricity is something we're going to have to always buy. And we will allow companies to extract a margin if they're involved in the delivery of rental property and electricity. So hosting will always have margin. This is my very simplistic view of the world. Category 2 company. Category 3, and this is where you want to be, privilege. So what is a privilege-based company? This is where you go if you are a marketplace. Right? This is where you go if you have network effect. This is where you go if you have scarcity, if you have a data asset, if you have built a brand. Right? So Twitter, technologically, if we had unlimited capital, we couldn't build Twitter. We could build the software that runs Twitter, but people go to Twitter because it's where people on Twitter are tweeting, right? And once you get there, you've transitioned from originally, like Twitter always was a category 3 company, right? They just were a small Category 3 company and they got big, right? But you can't, it's very hard to catch those companies. That's why you want to be there. Craigslist, marketplace, same thing as Twitter, very obvious, right? SiriusXM, the reason why I put them on there is because what do they have? Satellites? Well, I could put satellites up. What? No, I could get subscribers. Licensing of what? No. They have exclusive use of the range of radio spectrum. No other company can do this, right? Like that's a big deal. Originally, whenever we said satellite radio is going to be a thing, what did the government say? Oh, we're going to fix competition and make sure there'll be healthy competition, and we're going to give 2 licenses, one to this company called XM and one to this company called Sirius. Like, oops, right? So they have a lock on this scarce resource of spectrum, right? So which I think scarcity, owning like the market and some scarcity is really a special case of network effect. It means you've gotten to the leverageable edge of containing most of something, right? I missed any points on that? Brand's another one that's important to mention here. So like, you know who's got a massive brand investment? Coke, right? Huge, right? Kleenex, right? Like, it doesn't. I could build a Kleenex. I could design one that's like 8 million times better than other Kleenexes, and I would use it, and it'd be awesome. And you'd say what it's called, and I'd say flingum flongum, and you'd be like, well, cool. I'm just going to call it a Kleenex. Continue calling it Kleenex, right? Like that is why Category 3 is where you want to be, right? Google is, in my opinion, the most successful Category 3 company of all time. Everything they do reinforces their leverage into the data asset and into the marketplace, right? They just nailed the center of the bullseye on building that kind of business, and everything they're doing is reinforcing it. It's amazing to see, and I do hope that they hold up to the don't be evil. I don't know how much I trust Google now, but whatever. But it's a very successful Category 3 company, right? So, you're not what you are forever, though, right? You can transition these categories. You start as one, you transition to another, back and forth, whatever. And so I have a couple examples of that. Microsoft, I framed as a Category 1 company circa 70s and 80s. Totally it was. What gave Microsoft its first real big win in the application space, right? Office. Like they beat out Lotus. It was better. It was a better product. They put more engineering effort into it. They out-innovated. It's great. After you get to the 90s, the thousands, people don't like Office anymore. Why are they still using it? Because they transitioned to a Category 3 company. And look, Office became a format of interchange for documents. Like I couldn't not use it because it's the thing everybody else uses. That moved them from Category 1 to Category 3. So they spent a lot of energy investing in this Category 1's phase, and they've spent a lot of time extracting value in this Category 3 phase. They did the same thing with Windows, right? Amazon obviously started as a Category 2 company, right? Like we're selling stuff, but then they become a marketplace, and AWS and all of this range of services, and can anybody deny that they are one of the most successful platform companies, if not the, that has ever existed and may ever exist, right? If you really can build something that's a platform, that is very hard to displace. Apple, when they were innovators, when they out-engineered Category 1, when iOS in the Apple App Store is the only place where you can put your app to get any eyeballs, that's Category 3, right? Like everybody's trying to come up with this clever thing that they can use to leverage their way into being Category 3. But you don't stay Category 3 forever either necessarily. And this doesn't just apply to tech and software companies. I use Coke as an example, and I do think that Coke's brand absolutely makes it a Category 3 company. And Walmart, right? Category 3?
Absolutely.
Right, why?
Logistics company for one thing.
So, but what makes a logistics company Category 3?
It provides the service of taking goods to a consumer, and it's become a platform for that.
Right, so he said it provides the goods for taking products to a consumer, and it's the platform for that. So it's not just because they're big and they have efficiencies. It's because they're basically a marketplace, right? They're connecting people that need to get their products long tail out to middle of nowhere. Guess who's out in the middle of nowhere? Walmart, right? Like this is like if you want your stuff sold, you have to go through them. They've crossed that realm into being a real marketplace, right? Not just a vendor. But all this stuff decays, right? You can't maintain your position forever. So Microsoft started out as a Category 1 company. They transitioned to Category 3 very quickly with products like Windows and Exchange and Office, right? Huge amount of leverage there. They extracted, this is the only reason why they even exist, because everything else they've done has flopped, right? Like, right? I mean, like I think Xbox just went like lifetime positive. Every other product investment they've ever made, is anybody, SQL Server, that's the fourth. Those 4 products, every other thing Microsoft has done has been a net loss, right? In the entire history of the company. So, Encarta? So they're Category 3 company, right? Huge leverage. Like, let's say this is the 90s, right? But it erodes. Microsoft is not a Category 3 company right now, right? I mean, maybe in certain like pockets, right? It's in some mixed way, but for sure Office as a product is not Category 3 anymore, right? Google Docs and there's other formats, right? It's gone, it's done. So what do they have to do? They have to go back and reinvest into figuring out the next way to get to become a Category 3 company. Microsoft and Intel are examples to me of companies that have gone back and forth between having a really big win that they've leveraged into being a sustainable, durable advantage that then has eroded on them that they've had to reinvest in again. So Intel, right? Like x86, I mean, who writes software in here that gets compiled to x86, all right? Like everybody, right? Like they won that. That's like a platform win. It's huge. It's like being Kleenex, right? But they got their clock cleaned by AMD for a very brief period of time, right? In the mid 2000s. It's like so they just back and forth where they have to go and they have to innovate and win the next technology platform, right? And now it's what is it? It's low energy. It's Internet of Things. It's it's GPU. Like there's like so they have to guess right on the next innovation and invest into it in this cycle, and then extract value as a Category 3 company over some cycle. So it's hard to kind of stay at top. All right, so that is kind of my styles of durable business that is existable in the space. So I'm going to give you a little sum up, and then I won't stand in the way between you and the bar much longer. So the question here is really, what is your competitive advantage, right? Like how do you compete in the market? How do you earn the margin that you extract? And as a venture investor, I actually it irritates me. I think it's an idiotic question to ask a startup. I think it's the dumbest question in the world. Because I expect no startup, like how could you possibly have a moat? How could you possibly have a competitive advantage as a startup? You can't, not the kind I'm thinking about. It'd be like starting out as a Category 3 company, right? Well, yes, you could start out as a network effect-based company, but you have no network, right? So you have you have nothing, right? But what I want to see, and the way I think that you should think about building companies on open technology and free tech in this world is, what are we doing today that can give us just this little bit of a gap that we can leverage into transitioning from being a Category 1 or Category 2 company to a Category 3 company? Right, so how do we build to the leverage? Right, that's how you should be thinking. So when someone asks you about competitive advantage, talk about how you're going to build it over time, doing the thing that you know you can do before anybody notices that it's a thing and collapses the margin on it, right? So that's very much how I'm thinking about the world. This is my email address. This is my Twitter handle. You can tell me where I'm wrong or tell me I'm an idiot or send me whatever. So happy to hang out, and I'll be in the bar afterwards. Thanks for coming to this. I'm having a good time in Arkansas. Go NWA.